Singapore is opening the door to migrants. Today, more than a third of the population is made up of foreigners and permanent residents. Hungry and driven, these new migrants take up the menial jobs shunned by the locals, and they compete in the better-paying jobs market. I'm Fauzia Ibrahim. In this edition of 101 East, we look at how immigration is changing the face of Singapore. Many of Singapore's permanent residents and foreign workers come from China. These new migrants have rocked the boat in a society that's used to order and routine. Chan Tao Cho reports on the challenges these foreigners face in trying to settle in here and how Singaporeans are affected.
My name is Chan Yu Hong. I've been driving almost 12 years now. Before I start my day, every time I tell myself, 我是求财不求气.
A Singaporean taxi driver, Chan Yu Hong enjoys a chat with passengers he meets from all walks of life. His daily mantra to not seek frustration has been increasingly tested in recent years by the rising number of foreigners living in Singapore. In particular, he says, those from China who jump taxi queues and haggle over the fare.
Those locals, we queue. Whatever we do, we queue. When they want taxi, they just want it right in front of them. He just rush in. I say, no, sorry, I can't take you. No, why not? I pay you. And secondly, okay, when they go for a taxi, they every time bargain. I say, we don't do this here. No, I come from China. We do that every time back there. That is your place. This is a new place to you. So you cannot, bring your attitude here.
Chan Yu Hong's encounters, even if not representative of all Chinese migrants, are a snapshot of issues arising from the change in Singapore's social fabric. The government plans to increase the population from the current 5 million to 6.5 million people through migration over the next 10 years. With the country's population aging fast, leaders believe migration will address Singapore's low birth rate and grow the talent pool in order to sustain the economy.
We are not producing enough babies. I guess, Singapore has always been a very pragmatic society. If the government says we need this for our economy, I think most Singaporeans will listen.
A Singaporean lawyer, Dian Chen, is half Malay and half Chinese. She recently joined a group in Facebook, a popular social networking website called I am Singaporean and tired of non-English speaking service staff. With about 12,000 members to date, the group was created in frustration at the growing number of Chinese migrant workers flooding the service industry who cannot speak English.
English is just a common language. They don't speak English, or more importantly, they don't see a need to try.
In Singapore, nowadays, the labor work, that means those manual work, the locals shine away because they don't want to work so hard anymore. And moreover, the pay is no good.
Indeed, some 1.3 million foreigners now take up such jobs. They stay in Singapore on renewable work permits that last 2 or 3 years each. Deep in the residential heartlands of the island, Li Han is one such case. She left China 10 months ago to work as a kitchen hand for a food catering business in Singapore.
Back home, I used to work in a kitchen too, so it's not a big deal. I work like this every day. People say locals want shorter hours and more money, but we come because we think the money is good enough. Singaporeans should feel proud that their country is attractive to foreigners. If not, people wouldn't want to migrate or work here. The biggest problem I face is the language, because I don't speak English or Malay. So I use sign language or physically show people the things I'm referring to.
Her employer Danny Lim says hiring foreign labor is simply about cost to the company.
Foreign workers usually are cheaper. They are willing to work longer hours and they usually work harder. As for the locals, usually they will tend to get a better job elsewhere, since their education levels are quite high in Singapore.
Among the other 3.7 million Singapore residents, more than 500,000 are permanent residents. The government says they only take up higher-level jobs that create work opportunities for Singaporeans. But critics feel they provide direct competition in the job market.
Especially when jobs taken away by the foreigners, the urge is there that, you know, why can't I get the job? Why didn't I get a job?
We're seeing unprecedented levels of immigration at all levels, not only jobs but nobody else wants to do. The rationale for the loose immigration policy is that it provides a very easy way of boosting the GDP growth without having to worry about productivity. We should have a minimum wage to force companies, employers to use labor more efficiently. We also think that where there are labor shortages, they can be addressed by exploiting our pool of underutilized older workers.
To address growing resentment from locals, the government has committed about $7 million for programs to help new migrants integrate into society. Among them, free English lessons.
Most of the issue is due to the misunderstanding of the different culture. To me, is we have to communicate more.
Chen Dongcheng arrived as an undergraduate 9 years ago on a Singapore government scholarship. After graduating, he took up the offer of permanent residency and soon settled into life in Singapore. He's also a committee member of Huayuan, an organization that has programs to help PRs and workers from China assimilate with locals. But as someone who grew up in Fujian province, Singapore will never be home in the truest sense.
I will call Singapore a second home because hometown is totally different to me. Like language, like the everything you are very familiar when you are a child. The first generation that from other countries, they will always feel something that is missing.
But Chong Li-ling and her husband feel that Singapore truly is home. Both Chinese nationals, they became permanent residents 3 years ago.
When I first arrived, I could feel some discrimination. Like when I take taxis and chat with the drivers, I feel it. They can tell from my accent I'm from China. But the situation is much better these days. Some people think we are here only because we are poor. They sound snobbish when they ask if Singapore is a lot better than China. But it's not so common now. Perhaps because there are so many people from China here today, so understanding among us has improved.
Chong Li-ling's husband Wang Jiangyu is a law professor at the National University of Singapore.
I still have to maintain close connections with my home country, and that's also my value to Singapore, because I could serve as a bridge between my faculty and the legal communities in China. In these globalization days, you can't close your door. That's never possible.
Up until the early 20th century, migrants flooded Singapore in search of a better life. They sailed for weeks from China to work as cheap labor or as traders. They eventually settled down to build the foundations of modern-day Singapore, one of Asia's richest countries today. Taxi driver Chan Yu-hong's grandfather was one of them. But whether Singaporeans can deal with the social issues from this new wave of migration remains to be seen.
This week, 101 East comes to you from Singapore, where we are discussing the city-state's liberal immigration policies and its effect on the nation. Joining us now on the panel is Siu Kum Hong, a former nominated Member of Parliament. Jolovan Wham is from the Humanitarian Organisation for Migrant Economics, a local NGO that helps migrant workers. And Dawn Deckel from the Singapore Institute for International Affairs. Thank you very much for joining me this morning. Siu Kum Hong, if I could just start with you. Now, migration is a norm in a globalized world. The problems that Singaporeans are raising in terms of the issues that surround new migrants here in this country, are they justified? Are those complaints justified?
we do need to have an open immigration policy, and I think very few people actually dispute that. But I think there are a couple of a couple of factors that are really unique to Singapore. I think first and foremost is that in Singapore, all Singaporean males have to do compulsory military service. We call that national service. And even after you finish 2 years of that, you've got ongoing obligations to come back for reservist training. And I think that's what really sticks, in Singaporeans' craw, because they have got to do this, whereas new migrants don't have to do that. I think there is a perception that it puts Singaporean males at a disadvantage, compared to foreign immigrants.
Jonathan Wham, you work with new migrants trying to assimilate them into Singaporean society. What are their complaints about trying to fit in?
Oftentimes their complaints are more to do with their labor-related issues, problems with their employers, for example. Employers who they don't get along with their employers, or employers who abuse or exploit them. Other kinds of complaints usually come from having improper amenities and accommodation. And because we have a liberal immigration policy to basically recruit a lot of low-wage migrant workers, but we don't think about the social support system that has to come in tandem with that, and also with the social support structure, like proper sleeping places, proper places to rest. So the government has not really thought very much about all this, but has just liberalized the recruitment of these workers. So the corresponding services that should be given to them is not available, but yet there's still so many of them coming in.
And I just want to add a little bit to that. In Singapore, we don't have a minimum wage. So if we have low wage, foreign workers coming in to be our cleaners, etc., they are actually taking away those jobs away from Singaporeans, and there's a substantial number of uneducated older Singaporeans who were relying on those jobs, and they have seen their salaries at the lower end of the scale depressed by that.
John Jekyll, would you say that this is a policy, this immigration policy, liberalising the immigration policy, was not a well thought out policy?
Well, I think we need to start with what the new vision and aspiration for Singapore is. Singapore has gone from third world to first world very quickly. It's a success story. But now going forward, they want to be a player on the global arena. So how do you do that? Well, how you do that is you have companies that come to Singapore that show up on the Fortune Global 500 list. Right now we have two companies. We have Flextronics and we have Wilmar. So Singapore, with only 5 million people, has two companies. But those companies are not based on a natural resource. But these companies rely on unskilled as well as skilled laborers, okay? You need both.
We're going to have to leave it there for just a moment. When we come back, we'll have more on Singapore's liberal immigration policies and how those policies are affecting the nation. Stay with 101 East.